And for more on post-election reactions from party leaders, watch the final episode of Elections 360 on Saturday at 8 p.m.
All right, let's switch gear a little bit. Tonight we're asking if the COP26 Climate Summit, currently underway in Glasgow in Scotland, is a watershed moment for South Africa and for the world. The president says it is. South Africa is set to receive $8.5 billion in a deal to help end its reliance on coal. That's around 130 billion rand. Currently, 80% of South Africa's power comes from coal-fired plants, considered dirty energy providers. But South Africa needs all the power it can get, given the blackouts we have. Even before Glasgow, government had planned to shrink coal's contribution to the energy mix to less than 60% by 2030. Let's get some analysis, but first, a quick update from Scotland, from Glasgow, from our correspondent Laura Makin Isherwood. Laura, so today about young people, a very young person in the form of Greta Thunberg, and protest action. Just tell us about what happened today.
Yeah, exactly. So tens of thousands of young people have met in Glasgow to protest against the actions that people are taking around the world, leaders, countries, and they're trying to encourage them basically to stop actions that affect climate change and are going to make it worse. They've been marching through the streets all together and have also presented a statement to Alok Sharma, the COP26 president here in the United Kingdom, setting out what they are looking for. Now, leaders have said that they are willing to work with young people to hear their voices, because ultimately it is them that's going to have to deal with the issues moving forward. But there is a lot of scepticism, I suppose, from Greta Thunberg in particular. She's been speaking today in the centre of Glasgow, and she's obviously coined that phrase blah, 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 basically saying she doesn't believe that this summit, even though there have been plenty of pledges made in this first week, will actually be enough to make a difference. And she wonders whether those promises made by nations and by leaders will actually be followed through.
And how many people share her view? Because we've seen climate commitments been made before. Is there a sense of confidence that this time the world will get its act together or not?
Well, there has been some analysis from the International Energy Agency that said that the pledges that have been made so far would actually limit global warming to around 1.8 degrees. Now, that's below the 2 degrees maximum that's been set by the Paris Accord 6 years ago, but the target, of course, is 1.5 degrees, a 1.5 degree warming around the world as average. That's the limit that's been set, whereby scientists think some of the effects of climate change could at least be mitigated, and there won't be the catastrophic feedback cycles kicking in, the melting of ice caps and the consequent exacerbated warming of the seas and melting of permafrost that would release more methane and other greenhouse gases into the air. However, there is some scepticism, of course, because some of the pledges that have been made have already been rolled back on slightly by some countries, namely Indonesia, who had promised to try to cut deforestation by 2030. They've now said that that's not fair and goes against all of their development plans. So while there's a lot of promises being made, actually only time is going to tell as to whether those will be followed through.
And it's always said that nothing can really change unless, for example, you have the United States as well as China, the world's biggest economies, all on the same page. And that's not happening yet.
Exactly. You know, we've got the US who have failed to sign up to that decision to move towards zero carbon in terms of coal-powered energy plants by 2030. Russia and the US have not sent their leaders here to take part in that. That's being seen as a bit of a signal that they're not really on board with the rest of the Western nations. And of course, there is that issue as well between developing nations and the developed societies of the North in terms of having the cash to move towards a greener economy, opening up greener jobs, and definitely the Southern Hemisphere, those nations that are going to feel the impacts of climate change the most, are looking to the North and asking for even more cash and support and technology to help them make this move.
Thank you very much for that update from COP26 in Glasgow in Scotland, Laura Makin Isherwood. Let's now speak to Peter Attard-Montalto, who is a researcher from Intellidex, and he'll also be attending the COP26 Summit next week, looking specifically at the view from South Africa. How beneficial is this all for us, or how onerous? Peter, thank you for joining us as always. There is a date of 2030 already at play in South Africa, and then this idea that by 2050 we could close the coal mines, and then this big deal announced at COP26. How does it change things for South Africa and change those timelines?
Good evening. Well, South Africa has become a kind of darling of COP already. The speed out of the gate on the second day, of course, with this massive announcement. It came after a lot of skepticism, let's remember, from many emerging markets around developed nation commitments to reach $100 billion per year in financing. That goal has been missed, of course, for its first target, which was 2020, and the OECD saying maybe it wouldn't be met till 2024 or after. And so I think that's why we came out with this number. This number was a bit bigger than initially expected. The envoys who were in South Africa originally were talking of a number about $3.5 billion. South Africa was cheeky and pushed it up to 10. We come out at 8.5. It's really quite a historic amount of money. But we do need to be very careful, I think. This is ultimately a political declaration. This is not a lending agreement. And the real challenge now is actually turning what is some very carefully worded, one might say slightly woolly language around, in particularly decommissioning of power stations, into actual firm conditionality that's part of lending agreements. And that's really where the rubber is going to hit the road, and where I think some of the political challenges around this political declaration, the fact I don't think there's full cabinet agreement in this political declaration, or rather some of the interpretations of it that will end up coming out in the conditionality when we do reach that stage in those negotiations in the next year.
So what you're saying is we shouldn't celebrate until the money is in the bank, and we're using it wisely as well.
Exactly. So, I mean, there is a split in the countries who are giving this money. It's viewed as one block, but there are some differences of opinion, for instance, over the funding of the existing IRP decommissioning schedule versus the need for an accelerated decommissioning schedule. The US and the UK definitely want and the World Bank and some of these other entities definitely do want a faster pace of decommissioning. Some of the European nations are slightly happier with the existing pace. There are disagreements as well in terms of how much you should fund hydrogen, how much you should fund renewables on Eskom's balance sheet, and the move of the car manufacturing industry to electric vehicles. These are things ultimately, of course, that the private sector can finance. I think that's where, the very good work that the Presidential Climate Commission has been doing on the just energy transition really will come into their own. What is private sector financeable? What isn't? Where does this other money, granting concessional money, get best used? From my opinion, that's really in Mpumalanga. It's around social plans. It's around labour development plans. Around decommissioning is probably going to be much, much more use than things the private sector would otherwise be financing.
So I think you've picked up on one of the controversies. The Metal Workers Union says that 100,000 jobs in coal mining could be at stake, and we haven't even spoken about the truck drivers, for example, that carry the coal. So huge concern about job losses, that we may do this too quickly and be in a very precarious position. Do you think South Africa can transition very well away from coal?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think given money, given support that's coming, given the amount of planning and leadership that's coming from Eskom, from the leadership there, both Andre and his staff who particularly look at this issue, then the answer is yes. But there are some hard realities, right? There are going to be very large job loss numbers. The point is not the job loss number. The point is what you do with them, how you reskill them, how you redeploy them. That's where unions really need to step up to the bar and get involved. They need to be running or helping run or whatever it is, accrediting, reskilling and retraining regimes. They need to be working with people, giving them money and how you deploy that for reskilling and helping people set up SMMEs, doing rooftop solar installation, whatever it happens to be. Those sorts of things are really where unions need to step up and get involved. But the trucker point is very interesting and important, I think. One can get concerned about that, and obviously for the people doing the trucking, it is a concern. But we should remember that that should never have been the case in the first place. The only reason this is trucked is because it should be moved by rail, is because of dodgy deals done historically around coal. So we need to be very, very careful as well about not getting trapped in the status quo, which is very inefficient as it is. But I think when we zoom out, there are so many reasons for this transition as well, let's not forget, and for these communities in Mpumalanga, including sulfur emissions in particular, which have been linked to deaths in the province, as well as the fact that a lot of these power stations simply are not functioning and require huge amounts of maintenance actually to get them to function even as badly as we're seeing now with stage 4 load shedding.
So the dangerous area, sometimes it feels like we have so many issues in South Africa that is not even focused on enough in Mpumalanga. So thank you for bringing that up. Finally, is this a great deal for us? Some of the naysayers, I guess, are saying what we need now is actually better quality coal. We need to focus on the now, where we are, given load shedding, rather than sort of the futuristic ideal that may or may not happen.
So I just think that's not a credible argument, because if we were to believe that actual clean coal was a viable technology, then it did reduce emissions from 100% to zero, which it doesn't. They generally reduce emissions down to about 30 or 40% of full emissions. Then it would take you maybe 10 years to actually install this kind of technology that's not really commercially viable globally at the moment. And so it's just not a solution to current load shedding. In some countries, this may well have a role, as nuclear may well have a role in some other countries. But for South Africa, the point is that there is a system mix with now where we saw bid round 5 renewable energy coming in at just over 40 cents per kilowatt hour, combined with rapidly falling batteries plus gas. We can have this mix, which is least cost for the country, that helps industrialization, helps lower costs of energy come through without needing to take very high cost coal, add on top clean coal costs that make it clean. I just think that's a completely sort of non-viable route overall. And it's why we need a new IRP urgently to take a very dispassionate and technocratic view of these things, the costs involved. There's some very good work going on that front from people like the CSIR. And I think what you would end up finding is, and they've shown this on IRP 2018, is that actually a renewable-led program could well be jobs maximizing. And I think this assumption that you need coal to be jobs maximizing in an energy industry is not correct.
All right, thank you for that analysis. And he will be attending COP26 next week. Peter Montalto from Intellidex. Thank you very much.